Hi and welcome to the Allplane Podcast, where I talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, let me remind you once more that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. One of the very first guests of this podcast, when it was just taking off, was Addison Schonland. Addison is the co-founder of Air Insight, a web portal and digital platform that tracks the commercial aviation industry, with which I have had the chance to collaborate on some occasions in the past. When we recorded that first podcast episode with Addison, the world was going through the worst moments of the COVID pandemic. And there was a whole lot of uncertainty and even very serious concerns about the future of the aviation industry as a whole. The world has obviously moved on since then, and airplanes and airports are filling up again. So I thought it was a good time to welcome Addison back to the podcast to review the general landscape in the aviation industry right now, with a particular focus on the different aircraft programs that are currently underway, what major OEMs such as Airbus and Boeing are up to, and what other forces are shaping this industry, such as, for example, the drive to decarbonize and to become more sustainable. Also, I wanted to ask Addison for an opinion about projects that aim to disrupt the very way in which we fly. For example, eVTOLs, or even some more, let's say, outlandish projects like airships or even supersonic aircraft. So tune in for an in-depth conversation about the general state of aviation with an expert that is taking the pulse of the industry pretty much on a daily basis. Let me welcome Addison to the podcast. Hello, Addison. How are you?
Great. Thank you, Miguel. How are you?
Very well. Welcome back to the podcast, by the way, because
Thank you very much.
You were one of the very first guests when I launched it. It was during the pandemic. It was 2020, and it's been a while. So I thought it was a good idea to get you back here on the pod and talk about what's going on in the market. You are one of the people I know that are completely on top of what's going on. You track the market through Air Insight, and you have different analytical tools to keep track of that. Good time to review what's going on. First of all, just in case, because I guess many of the people that are following this podcast now were not subscribed when we launched because it was pretty small at the time. Just tell us in like 4 words about yourself and Air Insight and what you guys do.
Okay, Air Insight is we report news. If you go to our website, you'll see that we report a lot on what's going on, but we also do a lot of analytics. In our view, everybody can report, which is great, but if you don't have data to back up what you're saying and where you're coming from, it's just another opinion. So we are very data-oriented, and we've been going since 2009.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's airinsight.com for whomever wants to check it out. I had the chance to collaborate with some writings some time ago, and yeah, it's a great website, so I recommend everyone going in and checking it out. So it's been about 2 years since the last time you were here in the podcast. At the time, there was a lot of uncertainty. We were in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Everything had pretty much stopped. There was still the Boeing MAX issue still open, so lots of uncertainty. Yeah, so where are we now? I mean, it seems that the air traffic is back. Still not 100% recovered, but in the parts of the world that are open, it's back on track. So where does this leave all the, let's say, manufacturing side of the industry, and what are the prospects?
So I think that the return of traffic was a lot more aggressive than anybody was expecting. You may recall when we were first going into the pandemic, everybody was questioning, is this going to be a V recovery? And most people said it would be like the Nike logo, a swoosh. Turns out that the swoosh part, that long tail was a lot steeper. People like to travel. And we live in a service industry. So in business terms, you don't service people electronically. Like we're doing the Zoom chat here now, which is great, but you can maintain a relationship like that, but you cannot build one. You cannot start one.
Indeed, yeah.
So you have to come back, and the difficulty is that when the airlines started laying people off, the people that they laid off very often had security clearance, meaning that they worked on the air side of an airport. Well, all those people have to get security clearances to go back to work. That's number one. That's not easy because who's going to do all these clearances in a hurry? Number two, a lot of people in the airline industry are tired of I don't know how else to put it, but like it's an abusive industry. It doesn't like its employees. When it's good times, everybody's having a great time. When it's bad times, you get trashed. And pilots are an example of this. You know, the good times are here, and then when the bad times come, you may recall that when we went into the pandemic, there was a pilot shortage, and within 60 days, there was a surplus.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, these people are highly skilled, highly trained, just like any other profession. They have to go through refresher every year to prove their talent and their skill. And in their line of work, it's like at the peak of a profession, there is zero tolerance for anything that impacts safety. Recovering has been very difficult, very, very difficult. Now, I start with the airlines because that is the sharp edge of the sword, right? Behind that feeds into it. So you've got the people like Boeing and Airbus trying to deliver airplanes. Well, They also had to try and bring their people back.
Yes.
Slow down production. Well, you have to now bring the people back. You have to bring them back up to speed. Then there's the supply chain. I don't know if you saw today's news that Indigo is saying that they have a shortage of engines from Pratt & Whitney and CFM. Well, no surprise.
You mean Indigo, the airline, or Indigo, the investment group?
Indigo, the airline.
Okay, yeah.
The thing is that, as somebody once said, if you go, this person was working at the time for Pratt & Whitney. I think he now works for GE. But he made a very interesting statement. He said, you know, you go to the supply chain and you run into your competitor because we're all going to the same people to buy the parts.
Yeah.
So the pandemic shook a very fragile system, and the fragile system is now trying to repair itself. And we're seeing that the system's recovery is not easy.
Yeah. I was surprised to read a few days ago that it seems like the big aircraft might be back in fashion. I read that Emirates was asking whether there might be an opportunity to do something like the A380 at some point in the future. I don't know what's going on with this, because it seemed that like the era of super large aircraft was kind of over, but it seems now it's back.
I think the answer to that question really goes around the fact that you've got excess demand for travel. So you have to move all these people, but you don't have enough pilots, you don't have enough flight attendants. So guess what you have to do? You're not going to use small planes. You're going to use big planes. I need to move 500 people from here to there. I don't have enough crew for 2 777s.
Yeah.
If I have 1 380, that's what I'm going to use. It's more efficient. And the truth is that as economies mature, people start to travel. India is an unbelievably hot place for commercial aviation.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize the Indian population now is bigger than the population in China. And unlike China, India, you can travel if you want. You can go anywhere you like. All you need is a bit of money. And by the way, tickets in India are almost artificially cheap.
Yes, I know. I've been traveling around there and it was unbelievable. And that was quite a few years ago. At that time, there was a bit of an explosion in terms of the number of airlines. I think there's been a bit of consolidation since then, but still, I was amazed. I mean, to fly between, I think, from Kolkata to Delhi, we had like 4 or 5 different options, super cheap, plenty of options. And it seems still the case. Very, very competitive, very dynamic market.
Right. And in the US, what we're seeing is the big airlines are increasingly using wide body service domestically. And for example, you see that Southwest has moved from the 700 to the 800, now to the MAX 8. They've upsized. Delta and American are focusing on the 321.
Yeah.
United and Alaska are focusing on the MAX 9. Everybody's upsizing.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to. That's one of the things I had noted down here to ask you about, because you recently published a post, an article about A321 versus A320, and it seems that now in terms of deliveries, the 321, it's almost as big as the 320, which I guess has to do with this kind of upsizing that we're seeing across the board, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about, I guess, we sit on the outside. I've never run an airline. I've never bought an airplane, never bought an engine. So I have to put that all up front, that this is just data-driven opinion, not experience-driven opinion. But if you're looking at how the industry works, and you look at the credible number of exogenous or outside things that can impact your life as a running an airline, everybody knows about weather. But then you have these crazy, like a pandemic or SARS, or you have the war. I mean, the world is crazy. So you have to have a very flexible approach. And so when you look at this and you say, well, in the ideal world, we'll have what the saying was, horses for courses. This plane for this market, this plane for that market. Well, when everything gets thrown upside down, you now need to be a bit more flexible. And now you need to have something that you could, I suppose, be creative with. And in those terms, you buy something a little bigger, like a MAX 9 or a 321, because you get more seats and you can maybe do something more with it. I'll give an example. Yesterday, just on Flight Radar, I noticed Iceland Air is flying a MAX 8 from Reykjavik to Baltimore, where I'm based. That's over 6 hours on a 737.
Yeah.
I don't know about anybody who's listening to this conversation, but 6 hours on a 737 is enough for me to want to jump out. The nearest door or window, whichever it is. And the thing is, you see like the 321 JetBlue flying across the Atlantic now every day. We're seeing some really interesting things happen. So the airlines have to find a way, and fortunately there are tools like these new airplanes where they have long range, they're very fuel efficient, they're very quiet. So when I think about 6 hours on a MAX 8, it's not because I think that a MAX 8 is not a good airplane, but the MAX 8 is not like the 800 that I'm familiar with. It's quieter and probably is more comfortable, because 6 hours in a small plane, well, I mean, we fly coast to coast in the US. Long hauls in small planes too. So,
but it doesn't depend more on the sort of cabin. I mean, I wouldn't mind flying a narrow body across the Atlantic on a comfortable seat compared to maybe an A380 in a very cramped cabin.
Right. Well, it all depends on you looking at, let's say we're standing at the gate and we're looking at the two options to cross from let's say the Atlantic, and you say 6 hours in a small plane, you just automatically feel cramped. But it obviously depends where you seated. I think that there's so much in this recovery from the pandemic. There's so much new that we have to get used to. The security stuff at airports is insane. Travel today is not like travel was in 2019. And 2019 was not like 2015. It just seems to be getting worse and worse. And what can I say? But people like us who have to travel for work, that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
So you hope and pray that you're going to get an upgrade, and you hope and pray that you're going to get a nice experience. And maybe, it's never ending. This is a crazy industry.
Indeed. And in this landscape where we mentioned this upgauging of the fleet, so airlines like Wizz Air, for example, that seem to be going A321, which I guess is more efficient for them. But what about aircraft like the Airbus A220 that seem to just be a play on more niche markets? How do they fit in this kind of upsizing trend? Because it seems to be kind of going the opposite way.
Well, it's interesting. I would say it's not the opposite way. It's part of the same trend.
Okay.
So, for example, what we see in the United States, Delta is the only airline flying the 220-100. And my sense of it is that they're using that because we have a unique thing in the US called scope clause, where the major airlines have got to deal with their pilots that you can only have so many regional jets. And about 70% of the world's regional jet operations happen in the US. So the problem is that economics on a small airplane are not attractive. 50-seaters, for example, are very expensive to fly.
Yeah.
So what happens is the 50-seaters are going away, but it's hard to send them away because what are you going to replace them with? Certain markets only need a 50-seater. And people are not really keen on turboprops, although today's turboprops are really quite amazing. They're very quiet. They are very efficient. And by the way, they're much greener. Anyway, so what we think we're seeing is Delta is using the 220-100 to cherry pick the right regional routes, fly them what was previously with a regional jet, now with a mainline jet using mainline pilots. And because, and this is the interesting thing, Delta is a very big airline, very big.
Yeah.
If I can capture Miguel from a small town America and bring him into the system, now if he's flying to Barcelona or anywhere else, he's in our system. And I have a very attractive airplane which is very comfortable. And now he's not going to fly in a regional jet that's uncomfortable. He's going to, if he had a choice, same price, but more comfort experience, hopefully they will win the customer over.
Oh, yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, it's an upsizing in its right context, right? So...
Right. And the 220-300 is a very interesting airplane. It competes with what would be the 737-700 or MAX 7, or the 319 and the 319 Neo. So, I mean, they've only delivered like 4 319 Neos. It's not a great market shaking airplane. The MAX 7 has quite a bit more orders, but has not yet been certified. Southwest is hoping very much for this year. The 220-300, of course, is certified and flying. And you can see it in Europe with Air Baltic. They are doing amazing things with that airplane.
Yes.
So again, you have some airlines are just going to do the right thing with that size airplane. Now, to talk about the 220 means you should also talk about the E2. And we look at the people at Helvetic, and I've spoken to the CEO at Helvetic on a podcast similar to this, and he was saying that airplane, because of its range and its size, they can do something called pop-up markets. So if they have capacity available, let's say on the Thursday or Wednesday, they might put on their website, we have a pop-up market to wherever. And this airplane not only can carry the right load of people, meaning if you can sell 110, 120 seats, you sell them, right? But it's a pop-up market for the weekend. So they take you out on Friday and they bring you back on Sunday. And
interesting.
He said because of that airplane's capabilities, and what he meant there was range, because this is the really killer feature of these new airplanes. They can fly really much further than they used to. 737s fly now from the West Coast of the US to Hawaii. Most people can't imagine what that's like. That's also 6 hours.
Yeah.
So these new airplanes open up markets.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the really interesting thing. So yes, the 220 is small compared to a 320 or 737, but because of its range, when Bombardier still had what was in the C series, they flew a 220-300 from Wichita, which is like the middle of America.
In Kansas, yeah.
Yes, non-stop to Reykjavik.
Yes, I remember I was at the delivery of the first A220. Well, it was not the 220, it was the CS300 at the time, to Air Baltic. And it flew all the way from Montreal to Stockholm. But they did a technical stop in Stockholm, but they told us they had enough fuel to make it all the way to Riga in Latvia. And I think now they deploy this aircraft on routes from the Baltic countries to all the way to the Canary Islands, which is like, it's about 6, I think it's a 6-hour flight or something like that as well. It's like
even to Dubai.
Yeah.
So what we have there is a smaller airplane, but with amazing capabilities. The E2 and the 220 are what there's a very nice gentleman that I'm sure Bernie Baldwin in England, came up with the term crossover jet. And I think that's an excellent term for this. These are crossover jets that take you from regional to mainline, and they're in that 100-seat market, which was always very difficult. You remember Fokker was there, British Aerospace, Avro was there. They all struggled. Now you have the technology, and essentially what's interesting in the case of Embraer and Airbus here is the Pratt & Whitney GTF engine, which powers both these airplanes, which can take you from around about 100 seats to about 140 seats and can fly incredible distances, over 3,000 miles.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what about the other segment, the workhorse of the industry, where we have the Neos and the Maxes? What's the situation now? Is the Max, can we say the Max is out of the woods now?
Well, look, the truth is that I remember the CEO of Airbus saying a few years ago to me that he was very worried at the time about the duopoly being unstable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just looking at it this morning. If you look at deliveries this year, Airbus and Boeing account for about 95% of deliveries. So it's not like they're big in the market. It is they are the market.
Mm-hmm.
People like Comac, that everybody gets excited about that. It's going to be like decades before they can get to the same level. These two guys are so big; they are the market.
Yeah.
And anything that creates instability hurts everybody. So I think that we have to hope that the Max is sorted out and fixed. The deliveries are going as fast as they can, and airlines are flying them, and very happily. Hear nothing. That's what we want to hear. We don't want to hear any news about any airplane having any problems, because you know what? It's bad for the entire industry.
Yeah. No news, good news.
Right. And what's interesting is that I had the benefit of being invited to a pre-Farnborough meeting in Seattle, where they showed us the 7, 8, 9, and 10 Max. They parked them all like around this one place for us to look at. It was amazing to see. I mean, you think about this design, it's like 60 years old.
Yeah.
And Boeing is able to tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and extract value from a design that basically is from the 1960s.
Indeed, yeah. What about the 777X? What are the prospects here? I mean, what do you think it's
the thing you're touching all the live wires here. It depends. My opinion is based on what I read, and what I read is that there's some frustration from the customers, particularly Emirates. The thing that people outside the industry may not appreciate is that an airline typically sells seats 360 days in advance, right? So when you get told by an OEM, okay, your new airplane is going to arrive on August the 1st in 2021, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't happen. 360 days before that, you've been selling seats on that airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Now the time's coming that you have to deliver that seat to a passenger who's paid. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. What are you going to use? Mm-hmm. We see this all over the place now. Again, Indigo, this morning's story about their Neos, missing engines. Airlines are routinely now extending leases. Mm-hmm. I think Stephen Udvarhazy was saying it's like 90% or 95% of his customers are extending leases because they cannot get the new planes fast enough. And by the way, if you think about this whole thing at IATA and net zero and green and whatever, the quickest way to green is to have the newest possible engines. Mm-hmm. And they come with the newest possible airplanes. Mm-hmm. So the quicker you can retire the old stuff and fly the new stuff, the greener you're going to get. You're not going to solve the problem, but you're going to make it better.
What do you think about these projects like, for example, Airbus Zero E, like this idea of having a new generation of hydrogen-powered airliner, like clean sheet airliners? Is it feasible? Is it realistic? What do you think are the prospects for this happening in the foreseeable future? Let's say not 50 years from now, but let's say in a decade from now.
So I've got two mixed feelings about that. The first thing is that all the people promising this technology, they're older than me or my age, and they won't be around when that promise is meant to be delivered. They'll be retired or not even alive, right? I mean, let's be realistic. So everybody's what I call greenwashing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's one opinion, and I want to be honest about that. I'm skeptical. I'm very skeptical about this. But look back at this industry, right? When did commercial aviation start, really?
Yeah, like
the 1930s.
Yeah,
let's say between the wars, really.
Yes, in massive terms, even after the war. I mean, if you
right,
say, yeah.
And look at how we have moved technologically from then till now.
Yes, indeed. I was reading the other day, I think someone wrote that it was longer, I think, since the 737 that you mentioned, like you mentioned, the first variant of the 737 till now, than the time that passed between the Wright brothers' first aircraft until the Apollo program, something like that.
Right. So I think that what we have here is an industry that knows how to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they will probably accomplish a great deal of their goals. I don't know necessarily 100%, but I'm confident that the genius power in this industry will get us very close to it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any particular, let's say, favorite horse in when it comes to these environmentally friendly technologies that are being touted lately? We've been seeing lots of projects in electric, hybrid, hydrogen, sustainable. Well, yeah, sustainable aviation fuel. I guess it's gonna happen anyway because it's the most straightforward way, I guess, with delivering significant.
So I think hydrogen is very interesting, but the problem is storage.
Mm-hmm.
Electric is very interesting. The problem is storage. So, for example, when you fly an electric airplane compared to a fueled airplane,
mm-hmm.
as the airplane flies with a fueled airplane, it's burning fuel. It's getting lighter and lighter and lighter.
Yeah.
A battery-powered airplane doesn't get lighter. It stays the same weight. So there's a challenge there. But again, I think the genius power in this industry is going to figure out a lot of the solutions.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about all the options.
Yeah, in terms, I mean, in the electric field, one thing that I keep pondering is whether the fact that it's basically it's promising to be revolutionary in the shorter haul and in the smaller segment, where it's going to change some travel habits. You mentioned earlier the bad experience of traveling through large airports. You mentioned as well the regional travel, how you connect all these regional centers, and actually you have quite a few entrepreneurs now that are promising, with electric we're gonna kind of bypass all of this because you're gonna be able to travel direct from regional to regional, etc. So I don't know if that's gonna be
Miguel. I think the best example is, most people don't know this, but I was educated about this. Fascinated me. The city with the most helicopters in the world is Sao Paulo.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah.
Because the traffic is so bad. Sao Paulo will be one of the test places where eVTOL is going to really make an impact.
Yeah, actually, I've got there's a podcast that is coming up, an episode of this podcast. Well, actually, depends on when this one is published. Maybe it's already going to be published by then. But I've done a podcast about with one of the leading Latin American entrepreneurs in the field of eVTOL. So yeah, we talk precisely about this, about how in these areas with poor infrastructure. Yeah.
So, for example, I was speaking to who was then head of Magniacs, Roy Ganzarski, was talking to me about this and said, you need to change the way you're thinking, because all of us think about aviation in this one way, but now we've got this whole new way. It's like moving from a horse and a wagon to a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Completely changes everything. So he said, for example, if I could fly you from one part of Los Angeles to another, instead of a taxi, I could move you in 10 minutes and it's going to cost you $20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, hey, wait a second. That's a whole new way of doing stuff. It's green because it's electric. It's quiet. It's going to be safe. Why not?
Yeah.
So it's definitely exciting stuff.
Or even for longer distances, people, I don't know, if you're in Baltimore now, if you need to fly, I don't know, somewhere in the East Coast, maybe maybe I don't know if that would be between range. It's like
it's 200 miles.
200 miles, yeah. So something like that.
Quite doable.
Yeah.
and so where you see something interesting like that is it starts to impact regional flights.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can start making regional flights essentially a taxi service, meaning I don't have to fly 60 people in a small tube, I can fly 6, and I can do those. I can do it 12 times an hour instead of once every 2 hours. You can start seeing you moving traffic in the different ways.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't solve the problem of congestion, because that's a separate thing. But what I'm saying is we have to step back from this and see that we can solve the problem of moving people It creates new problems, new challenges, but we have new options now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very interesting, particularly because it's electrical, it's going to be cheaper. And this is a very important point to point out. Electrical motors have one moving part. One.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a turbine or a piston engine, we're talking about hundreds, thousands of parts. Electric motors are very simple. Very simple.
Yes, that's the beauty of it. There's so much going on in this industry. And we just had a Farnborough Air Show recently. We've got constantly new announcements, orders. We even had recently this interesting order. Well, I don't know if technically it's an order. It's the American Airlines following United with this Boom Supersonic. What's your take on this? Do you think that's going to happen?
I would say that on the supersonic thing, I am very skeptical. If we look at the timeline that they published of when they plan to have everything done, they should already have an engine. They should already be testing. And they don't have an engine and they're not testing.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to work. I obviously am a cheerleader for the industry. I want to see success. I'm embrace the success. I do not take pleasure in people having a hard time and struggling, because goodness knows this industry has had enough shocks to, if you've been in the industry long enough, you just don't want rainy days,
Yeah.
You want sunshine and happiness. And so I really would wish them well, but I got to say, the odds are steep and not necessarily in their favor. It's a lot of rah-rah right now. I hope they succeed. I don't know.
There's also the regulatory and public relations element here that plays against them as well, because of all the implications of trying to fly super fast. But what's interesting is that besides all this eVTOL and sustainability thing, we are also seeing quite a lot of flying concepts that are not the traditional one. Supersonic is one, but we have seen airships as well. For example, Airlander as well. We've seen recently a Spanish airline announced it's going to be the launch customer whenever it's ready. And we've seen other types of vehicles like Region Craft that wants to use ground effect vehicles. It's essentially like a hybrid between a boat and an aircraft, going very fast over water, but without touching it. So yeah, I don't know. It would be awesome if we had all these choices in the future to travel from point A to point B, even if possibly these concepts are not going to be useful for all use cases, but definitely interesting times, I think.
Well, Miguel, this industry has really always been the tension between the accountants and the engineers. The engineers come up with amazing ideas, fantastic ideas. Airlander, fascinating.
Yeah, actually, some of them, it must be said, some of these ideas are not new. Some of them go back 100 years or something like that. Yeah, the Zeppelin, but the ground effect vehicle as well. It's a decades-old concept. Just that they now new take on that with new materials, new technologies that I guess give a second chance to them. We will see. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, on the one hand, you've got to celebrate this, because let's wish them all success. But not everything in this industry works, because in the end, the engineers are not always 100% right, and the accountants are sometimes right.
Yeah.
You can come up with great novel ideas. The classic example, this nonsense now of everybody wanting to go into space. Space tourism. Come on, give me a break. There's no economic rationale for that, but if you're super rich and you would like to look down on the world like an astronaut, great. It's not tourism. It's a toy. It's like mega yachts and private jets. It's for playthings for a very small group of people. Don't wrap it up as tourism or something. Please get out of here. But at the same time, Velcro came from NASA. Velcro is very useful stuff on your shoes or anywhere else. So hopefully good stuff will come out of all these crazy things.
Yeah. Well, back to Earth.
Yes.
Let's focus on the let's say the mainstream aviation market, because you are one of the people I know that possibly has a better insight on what's going on. You got the whole picture. and obviously because you manage that Air Insight, you manage quite a few models to track the industry and to see what's going on in the different segments. So we are coming out, as we were saying, out of a bit of an exceptional period the last 2 years. What can you tell us about the current market situation? Tell us a little bit about what sort of elements would you advise people to focus on when looking at this market, and how you track this? I mean, you've got some models. Are there specific metrics that you focus on that are more useful than others?
So I think that the first thing that, and we spoke about a little bit at the beginning about, when we're talking about the 321 and the 220 and the E2 and the need to be flexible. You need to have it's almost like a size 9 shoe that you can do just, like that's the average that can do everything. And you look at the industry and you see that, for example, Airbus and Boeing are doing what they can to get orders. What we obviously see is that a lot of the orders, an order comes in as this well, you don't see it with Max because Boeing only says, so-and-so bought a Max. The airline might tell you that they're buying a Max 9, 10 or whatever, but it's very difficult to keep track of that because what people order and what they take delivery of is not always the same.
Yeah.
So I think that what we're going to see going forward is an increasing move towards finding tools that can be used in various ways.
What sort of tools? What do you mean?
Yeah, airplanes. So, for example, United has now announced that they want to replace their older 767-300s and their 777s. Replacing the 777 is actually quite easy because you've got the right 787, you've got the right Airbus equivalents. The 767, United has said, is very difficult to replace.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the 767-300 is actually the middle of the market airplane. Now, many people may not remember this because it's really a long time ago. When Boeing invented the middle of the market, they came out with the 7.5 and the 7.6 at the same time, had the same cockpit. If you could fly the one, you could fly the other. It was a brilliant move.
Yeah, and what happened to that? Because about a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk about this reactivating this concept, but it seems that it's been kind of paused, right? Or stopped.
So what's interesting there is, actually just takes me to one of my models. I'm just going to quickly look at this, the latest one of it. So it's interesting. Boeing did not replace the 757, and they thought they could stretch the 737 MAX, to the 9 and into the 10, and accomplish that mission. The problem is that they've done this really late.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Airbus 321 just got better and better and better. And now the 321 Neo, and now the LR, and then the XLR, they've got a family of these things that can do amazing efficient work. I don't know if you remember, there was an Iceland airline called WOW.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They flew a 321 from Reykjavik to LA.
Yeah.
In your mind, picture how long that flight is.
Yeah, although they got a couple of A330s, and I read some analysis saying that it's actually what that bankrupted them, or one of the major factors. It's that they onboarded this larger aircraft that they should have stayed with narrow bodies.
Yeah, unfortunately, the ambition there became a problem. But so when if you look at the sweet spot of the market. It used to be around 160 seats, the 320, the 737. That's moving. So, for example, the MAX 8 and the 320 now can seat 170 because they've got I make the joke about the 737 MAX. If you're going to the bathroom, you need to know what you're going to do, because when you're in there, you cannot turn around and sit down or stand up, because once you go in, that's the way you're going to be facing.
The Ryanair ones, they have up more than 200 passengers, right?
Yeah, that's the MAX 8-200.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a bit of a joke, but okay. The fact is that eventually you run out of real estate. I mean, there's talk about in the US now that the FAA is going to look at seat sizes. That's a great idea because people are not getting smaller. And you know what? I remember flying on WOW thinking, I don't need a seatbelt. Once I'm seated, I'm not moving. I can't. The person in front of me cannot push the seat back, but they're so close to me, we're like family by the end of the flight, um, it's uncomfortable. And these smaller planes are flying longer legs, like we spoke about before. Now,
Yeah.
I think that the sweet spot is really moving towards from 160, 170 to closer to 200. And there we see a huge swing in favor of Airbus because of the 321.
Yeah.
Our calculations through the most recent data from Airbus and Boeing, which would be June, is that between 2000 and June this year, Airbus is ahead in the single aisle, middle of the market, by 1,732 airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the world wants the 321 and the MAX 9 doesn't do it. The MAX 10 isn't even available, although we've seen Delta buy 130 of them, or 100 plus 30. And we see, people are, Qatar is now signed up for that, but Qatar signs up for some things that they don't take delivery of. So who knows? Bottom line is the world is moving to, I think, upsizing. And the middle of the market is a very important segment to watch.
Mm-hmm. And how much of an issue or a factor in the orders, in these cycles of orders between Airbus and Boeing, how important is the backlog of orders? Because I think at some point Airbus had a huge backlog. So if you wanted to order an Airbus, you had to wait quite a while. Right. So you would expect people then to start switching to Boeing in the meantime, if there were no MAX issues or stuff like that. So, and then maybe you build up a backlog at Boeing, and then the opposite happened, something like that. I don't know how.
It's not so easy. Bear in mind that the people that fly these airplanes for you are trained, highly skilled. So if you're an Airbus pilot, it doesn't automatically mean that you can fly a MAX.
No, of course, yeah.
So if your fleet is primarily Boeing, like it's Southwest, switch from the 737 flight deck to another one is a shocking change because you're going to have enormous training impact.
Yeah, but you would expect to have a few years to prepare in the meantime as well, right?
Well, maybe. If you look at for example, the number of simulators out there in the world today, there are not enough MAX simulators to train pilots, even if they run 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's a line at the door.
Have they managed to retrain all the pilots? Because I think there was an issue with that as well, because they'd spent so much time on grounded that they had to.
You notice that there's very little news about that particular issue.
Yeah.
I think everybody's quite happy to keep quiet about it. And the fact is that the pilots, certainly in the US, are now all getting big increases because the airlines are making money. And the bottom line is, without pilots, you have nothing.
Yeah,
they know it. The management know it, and guess what? You can actually operate an airline without managers, but you cannot operate an airline without pilots.
True. So what else you see in your models? What other trends do you think are relevant now to track?
I think that what we should be seeing more of, but we don't, is the crossover jet. We should see a lot more interest in that size airplane.
The A220s and E2s.
We should be seeing more interest in that. I think that the last big market in the world that has to catch up with aviation is Africa. So that's a very interesting place to watch. And what's interesting there is a lot of the airlines now in Nigeria are buying new, not secondhand. But the airlines in South Africa, which previously was by far the biggest market, they tell me the market cannot afford new airplanes there because it's too competitive. Now airlines come and go. But there is a market for secondhand E-jets that is doing very well, and secondhand 737s. The difficulty is, and the 320s. The difficulty is finding secondhand 737s and 320s that are economically viable, meaning they're not old and tired and expensive. Because you if you're living in an economy where your currency is not the US dollar, which is most of the world, oil is priced in US dollars, and the US dollar is going up right now, and for you in Europe it's nearly parity.
Yeah. Actually, I think it already passed that. I think it's
right. So you can imagine. So for an American tourist to Europe right now, it's happy days.
Yeah.
For a European tourist coming to America, it's awful. You used to get $1.3 to the euro. That's not the case. So if you're running an airline in a place like South Africa, it's very difficult because you have to pay US dollars cost for your oil, your fuel. So, 40%, 45% of your operating costs are fuel. That's awkward. Puts a lot of pressure on you. And by the way, you're paying for fuel today, but you sold the ticket 3 weeks ago when the price was something else. So now you have to make up that margin. How do you do that? It's a tough business.
Yeah. And here comes to mind a country like Nigeria, that it's an oil country, and it's a huge country, both in terms of land mass and population. But for some reason, the airline industry seems to have some permanent problem there, not taking off like it's done in other emerging economies.
Yeah, I think it's the African contagion. When I've spoken to people in the market there, they talk about something really interesting. The Europeans had a history of war and have decided that war is really dumb. That message hasn't got to Moscow yet, but war is really dumb. If you want to have a good life, stop fighting, make stuff together, open your economy, open up to each other, and guess what? The rising tide lifts all boats, right? So in Africa, if you want to fly, this is crazy. If you want to fly cheaply from one city to another city, often you have to go through Brussels. Is that insane?
Yeah.
Yes, it's completely insane because governments in Africa don't want to open up, it is incomprehensible to somebody from a Western culture to look at this and say, the economic opportunity is staring you in the face. What are you saying no to? Open your economy. African countries, many of them feel like they need to have a national airline. No, you don't. Why would you want a national airline? Why would you care? You want to move people efficiently. You want to move products and goods efficiently. If someone can do it efficiently, let them do it. Why do you have to be involved with running an airline?
Yeah.
South African Airways.
Europe used to be a bit like that as well, huh?
Right.
Until the 90s.
Right.
Yeah.
But look at what's happened.
Yeah. Well, you have these groups now trying to do some sort of Pan-African groups like Ethiopian, and I think there's a couple more that are trying to do that. But I think
Ethiopian is a very, very sharply run business, very well run business, but it's state owned.
Yeah. What about South Africa now? What's going to happen? We're going a bit off topic now, but I'm just curious because it's a market you know well, and I just wanted to ask your opinion about that because we talked about that last time when you were here on the podcast, and then it went bankrupt and it then restarted, and now I don't know. There's again some trouble, right?
The bottom line is, I think that the market just doesn't need South African Airways. Got Airlink that's doing well. You got another one called Safair that's doing well. Comair went bankrupt also. So they've essentially got two reasonably sized airlines that can cover everything that needs to be done domestically. They've got agreements and code sharing deals with other airlines that can move people in and out of the country. What's the difficulty here? The government should just stay out of the business because governments cannot run companies. Now, of course, you turn around and say, well, what about Qatar, Emirates? Okay, fair enough. Most countries cannot afford an airline. Just get out of the way. Let entrepreneurs do what they do. Let them risk their own capital. And you know what? When they risk their own capital, they're careful and they make good decisions. Example also in Air India. The government realized we're crazy. Why would we keep spending money on this company? The whole thing about government companies, it's jobs for pals or jobs for your voters. Well, eventually the taxpayer realizes, why am I doing this? Why am I paying for this?
Yeah.
And it's irrational. It's just irrational. But the bigger picture of Africa, if only they would get the vision, open up your skies to each other, you will actually do very well. And the problem they have there, of course, is airport fees. There's this concept or this vision there that commercial aviation is something to exploit and get money from. Well, don't kill the golden goose. Feed the goose, take care of the goose, and you get a lot of golden eggs. Just don't be greedy.
Very well. And for people that want to basically explore these figures, these analytics, what's the way to go?
Well,
what would you suggest? Because you've got at Air Insight, you've got different tools, right, to keep track of different metrics,
right.
different stories, different products, different ways to look at things.
Well, if somebody wanted to sort of take a look at what we have what we call data analytics. If you come to the website, airinsight.com, that'd be very good. We'd love to have you visit. Take a look there. You'll see data analytics. Then you'll see there's some free models. And of course, if you become a subscriber, you get access to about 50 different models. And even though they are US-centric, because that's the data we work with, it's okay, because very often people can see that benchmarking, because the US data is so much richer, that benchmarking data becomes very useful. So for example, everybody's interested right now in green, right? So what do we know about green? Well, we have models based on real fuel burn, not what the manufacturers say, real fuel burn by passenger per seat hour or by payload. And you can see how much carbon emissions an airplane is really generating. So there's lots of data, and of course, if anybody wants to contact us to talk about it or experiment or show me around if they like, we'd be very happy to do that, because it's like going through a library. If you're familiar with libraries, you know what to do, but very often it helps to have someone walk you through it.
Yeah, I actually, it would be easier to explain if this was a video podcast, which is something that I have in mind to start some point. With audio, it's a bit more difficult to explain, but yeah, you brought up a nice example. So you would go in there and you would see different types of aircraft. Which one is greener by taking into account a number of different variables that are measurable and objective, and you can compare them across the board, right?
Right. So, for example, with single aisles, one of the things that we found is that, interestingly enough, everybody loves the 321, but actually the greenest single aisle is the MAX 9.
Interesting.
And it's by quite a gap. And the greenest wide body is the 787-10.
And that when you say that's the greenest, it's because you assign a number of points, or you weight different.
Miguel, it's really simple. Really, what you do is you look at the fuel burn, and you look at gallons, or eventually turn it into liters for the metric version. But you look at the fuel burn, you look at the mileage flown, or the hours, and you look at the number of seats. So miles per seat hour, and you say, well, that formula, let's throw that against everybody and see what happens.
And you take into account the number of seats that each of the different operators have they fitted in.
Right.
Okay.
In the case of the 787-10, only United flies it. In the case of the 350 in the US and the 330 Neo, only Delta flies it. So those are Delta specific or United specific numbers, but it doesn't matter. In the end, it washes out because the data is so rich. There are literally hundreds of thousands of data points. So, it washes out pretty well, and it becomes a very useful metric. So, for example, if you were interested in 330 Neo's economics, the Delta data is going to give you a very good sense of how this thing works. If you were interested in, how does the 777, the bigger part, the 787 family work, the 8, 9, and 10, you can take a look at the data and see. I mean, it's very useful benchmarking.
Excellent. So yeah, even if we don't have the images now as we speak, I will try to to get some snapshots and maybe post them on the show notes so that people can get a glimpse of what you guys do at Air Insight. Airinsight.com. That's the website. You are also active in social media, right?
Yes, sir.
Where can people find you in case you?
Twitter is where we have some fun. We have a Facebook page, but how people feel about Facebook these days, I don't know. But we have a Facebook page that the stuff from our site feeds automatically into that. And then obviously our primary one is Twitter, but professionally we do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, Addison, like always. And thank you so much for finding time to be back here on the podcast and on discussing this kind of top level stuff about aviation. Always good to get the general picture of what's going on.
Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you.
Bye.
Before you go, and if you like this podcast, a quick reminder that it would be absolutely great if you could please give it a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you're using, or recommend it to a friend or whomever might be interested. Thank you very much and see you soon.